Now here to try to make some sense of all of this is Joe Hicks. He's the Vice President of Community Advocates Incorporated. Joe, I find this stuff extraordinarily disturbing. He says that this is the black church. This is not the black church, is it?
Well, it's his version of the black church. You know, listen, Glenn, I used to be the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization, by the way, founded by Martin Luther King. My job was to be in black churches almost every Sunday when I was running the organization, the Western region. And I would never hear the kind of things coming out of this pastor's mouth. Listen, Dr. King gave a very dramatic speech at the Riverside Church in New York City, where he condemned the war in Vietnam. A lot of black pastors at that point broke with him. They said he was going outside of the civil rights domain. But you never heard the kinds of things coming out of Dr. King's mouth that you hear coming out of this man's mouth.
You know, here's what
He's an embarrassment.
Here's what people have to understand. This is black liberation theology. Now, is there a chance that this is just a small part of this church, that somehow or another Barack Obama might have missed this? I mean, this has nothing to do, it seems, with the atonement and being set free by Jesus Christ. It seems to have everything to do being set free by destroying the United States government.
Well, listen, it's unlikely that somebody could sit in a church for more than 20 years and not be aware, peripherally even, that these were the kind of things that were being said by your pastor that you may not have heard, but you're sure hearing it from other congregants. Here's a man who apparently was in a very casual relationship with his pastor. They may have sat and had dinner. He must have known that this man had these kind of anti-white, anti-American views. So it doesn't quite work that Barack Obama can say, well, I wasn't there when he said this. Well, come on. You got to be aware of it. So these explanations simply don't work, which is why the guys drop it in the polls, because the explanations so far don't make sense. Even though he condemned and severed ties with this man this week, there's still a lot of questions left to be answered.
Here's what I think. I mean, you know what, if this is what your church is, that's great. I'm just glad it's on my radar screen so I know exactly who you are. And if you go to this church, I know exactly what the kind of things you think. Right. Barack Obama is trying to make it past that, oh, well, I mean, he can go, and you know what, they do a lot of good, too. How is it possible to believe that you could be influenced by this man, a guy who married you and your wife, who baptized your children, who you say is like a family member, and not be influenced by this kind of stuff?
Well, I don't believe for a minute that Barack Obama believes this kind of conspiratorial nonsense. What I think we may have had here is a marriage of convenience. Because here's a guy who came from elite universities, who was looking for black street cred, that got offered up by what was known to be the blackest church in Chicago. So I think it offered him the racial authenticity he sought as he sought public office, and he needed that to then court black votes. So, you know, look, but listen, as Shelby Steele says, here's a bound man. He needs white votes, he needs black votes. And he's trying to cross back and forth across this aisle to do both. Yeah. And I think now it's not working very well because this history now has caught up with him, and it's simply not working very well.
Joe, we have to take a break. Stay where you are. We'll be right back with more stuff that you just won't believe from the Reverend in just a second. If you're joining us tonight, we're putting Reverend Wright's own assertions to the test tonight. You've heard him say things like this.
The government lied about inventing the HIV virus as a means of genocide against people of color. Governments lie.
Okay. When he's pressed, Wright always uses the same excuse.
Persons who've heard the entire sermon understand the communication perfectly. The failure to communicate is when something is taken like a soundbite for a political purpose and put constantly over and over again, looped in the face of the public.
Okay, so I get it. He only sounds crazy because we just took that 8 seconds and used it for political purposes. All right, fair enough. So here's 2.5 minutes from that same sermon, including the HIV comment. You tell me, is the media taking him out of context and making him sound crazy?
The government still thinks a woman has no rights over her own body, and between Uncle Clarence, who sexually harassed Anita Hill, and a closeted Klan court that is a throwback to the 19th century, handpicked by Daddy Bush, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, between Clarence and that stacked court, they're about to undo Roe versus Wade, just like they're about to undo affirmative action. The government lied in its founding documents, and the government is still lying today. Governments lie. Turn to your neighbor and say, governments lie. The government lied about Pearl Harbor. They knew the Japanese were going to attack. Governments lied. The government lied about the Gulf of Tonkin. They wanted that resolution to get us in the Vietnam War. Governments lied. The government lied about Nelson Mandela, and our CIA helped put him in prison and keep him there for 27 years. The South African government lied on Nelson Mandela. Governments lied. Turn back to your neighbor and say it again. Governments lied. The government lied about the Tuskegee experiment. They purposely infected African American men with syphilis. Governments lied. The government lied about bombing Cambodia. And Richard Nixon stood in front of the camera. Let me make myself perfectly clear. We are not. But governments lied. The government lied about the drugs for arms Contra scheme orchestrated by Oliver North. And then they pardoned, the government pardoned all of the perpetrators so they could get better jobs in the government. Governments lied. The government lied about inventing the HIV virus as a means of genocide against people of color. Governments lied. The government lied about a connection between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, and a connection between 9/11/01 and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Governments lied. The government lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq being a threat to the United States peace. And guess what else? If they don't find them some weapons of mass destruction, they're going to do just like the LAPD and plant them some weapons of mass destruction. Governments lie.
Well, there's the full context. Is it really a soundbite issue? Here's Wright trying to explain now the HIV comment earlier this week.
As I said to my members, if you haven't read things and you can't, based on the Tuskegee experiment and based on what has happened to Africans in this country, I believe our government is capable of doing anything.
Okay, so now it's not a soundbite problem. Now it's just that we're just not educated enough to know the truth. I get it. We're going to bring back Joe Hicks from Community Advocates. Joe, I was watching your picture back coming from Los Angeles here in the monitor, and you are as disturbed by this as I am. It makes me physically uncomfortable to listen to this and hear it.
It's tough stuff, you know, and what you're really hearing is the ignorant ravings of a near madman here. And you know, what I think is shocking, you listen to the reactions of the audience in that church who are standing and yelling and screaming in response to, it makes for good theater. But this is horrible history.
But Joe, it's not only good theater. You put yourself into the role of an 8-year-old kid who's sitting here listening to it, or a man who's sat there for 20 years. How does this not affect your thinking? I mean, I looked at your pin, your flag lapel pin. I can understand listening to it why Barack Obama didn't want to wear a flag lapel pin.
Well, this is the epitome of racial victimization. As you say, think of being an 8 or 11-year-old kid sitting in that church that particular Sunday, hearing your government spoken about in that regard. Why would you want to stay in school if your country conspires against you? This is a completely disempowering message, and it really is embarrassing, shame. This is the kind of stuff you'd expect to hear from some traveling itinerant preacher somewhere, not someone heading up one of the largest black churches in the city of Chicago. This is really shocking stuff, and it also ties in this almost Marxian kind of notion of black liberation theology that is really an anti-American, hate American rant.
Except it's not about black liberation, because they took down, what did he call him? Uncle Clarence Thomas. I guess all blacks
Oh, yeah.
are not created equal. Joe, thank you very much. We'll have some closing thoughts here in a minute. Do not go anywhere.